My name is Sophia Chen. 9 years ago, the man I loved disappeared, leaving me with a baby and a cryptic note. And then, at a glittering wedding, I uncovered the truth. He had never abandoned me. He had sacrificed everything to keep me and our daughter alive. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever overcome pain for the sake of family. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happens next. The envelope slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the hospital floor like a wounded bird. Gold lettering caught the harsh, fluorescent lights of the ICU hallway as it landed face up. Dr. Marcus Sullivan and Victoria Ashworth request your presence. My hands were shaking. 9 years, 9 years of silence, and now this. Sophia, you okay? Amanda's voice cut through the fog in my head. My best friend and colleague stood in the doorway of the break room, her scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift. Concern etched across her tired face. I picked up the invitation with trembling fingers. The paper felt expensive, cream-colored with embossed edges. Everything Marcus had always been drawn to. Elegant, refined, perfect. Not like me and my faded Cherokee scrubs and sneakers with holes I kept meaning to replace. It's nothing, I lied, stuffing the invitation into my pocket next to my stethoscope. The weight of it felt like carrying a stone. Amanda stepped closer, lowering her voice. Soph, your face just went white as those bed sheets. What is it? Before I could answer, my pager buzzed. Room 314 needed me. Mrs. Patterson, post-op complications? I pushed past Amanda, grateful for the distraction, but the invitation burned against my hip with every step. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of medication rounds and patient assessments. But my mind kept drifting back to that gold lettering. Marcus Sullivan, the man who had vanished from my life like smoke, leaving me pregnant and alone with nothing but a cryptic note about safety and silence. I'd built a good life since then. Lily was 8 now, smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. We had our little apartment in Capitol Hill, our Saturday morning pancake tradition, our small but happy world. I'd worked my way up from nursing student to head of the ICU, earned respect, built a career. People looked up to me here, but seeing his name again felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. I found the invitation again during my break, hidden behind the half-eaten sandwich I'd forgotten to finish. My fingers traced the letters of his name, Dr. Marcus Sullivan. He'd made it then. The neurosurgery residency he'd been so passionate about, the career he'd dreamed of building. We used to talk about it during those long night shifts when we were both just kids playing dress-up in scrubs, pretending we knew what we were doing. For the lives we saved together, he'd whispered once, holding my hands in the empty OR after a particularly brutal night. I'd believed him then, believed in us. In the future, we were building together, one patient at a time. There was something else in the envelope, small, metallic, falling into my palm like a secret. A medical bracelet, silver, tarnished with age, with an inscription I recognized immediately. For the lives we saved together, S and M. My breath caught. This wasn't just a wedding invitation. This was a message. He wanted me to come. But why? To watch him marry someone else? To close a chapter that had been left hanging open for 9 years? Or was there something else, something I wasn't seeing? I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, feeling the cool metal against my skin. It felt like putting on a piece of my past, a reminder of who I used to be before everything fell apart. The invitation said Boston, 4 days away, black tie. I hadn't decided yet if I was going, but deep down, I already knew the answer. The apartment felt smaller when I got home, like the walls had moved closer together while I was at work. Lily was sprawled on the living room floor, homework scattered around her like confetti, pencil tucked behind her ear in that absent-minded way that reminded me so much of him. "Mom, you're late," she said without looking up from her math worksheet. Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs brought me mac and cheese. It was the gross kind with the powder, not the real cheese kind you make. Sorry, baby. Long day. I set my keys on the kitchen counter, the metal jangling louder than usual in the quiet space. Everything seemed louder tonight. The refrigerator humming, the upstairs neighbors walking around, the distant sound of traffic on Pine Street. I pulled the invitation from my pocket, smoothing out the wrinkles. The gold lettering seemed to mock me, under our cheap overhead light. Victoria Ashworth. I wondered what she looked like, this woman who'd captured what I couldn't keep. Probably blonde, probably beautiful, probably everything a successful neurosurgeon should have on his arm. What's that? Lily had appeared beside me like a ghost, the way 8-year-olds do. Her dark eyes, Marcus's eyes, studied the invitation with curiosity. Just work stuff. Another lie. They were coming easier now. She touched the corner of the invitation with one finger. It's pretty. Like a princess invitation. A princess invitation. If only she knew how far from a fairy tale this really was. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The invitation lay open on the table between yesterday's bills and a reminder about Lily's parent-teacher conference. Normal life, ordinary problems, the kind of life I'd built from the wreckage Marcus had left behind. I pulled out my laptop and, against my better judgment, started searching. Dr. Marcus Sullivan, Boston. The results flooded my screen. Photos from medical conferences, articles about groundbreaking procedures, a profile in Boston Magazine calling him one of the city's most eligible bachelors. That last one made my stomach turn. In every photo, he looked the same but different. Older, more polished. The messy hair from his resident days was styled now, the cheap ties replaced with expensive ones. Success looked good on him. It always had. I clicked on an image from what looked like a hospital fundraiser. Marcus in a tuxedo, arm around a petite blonde woman in a red dress. Victoria, presumably. She was beautiful, in that effortless way some women are, like she'd stepped out of a magazine. They looked perfect together, like they belonged in those photos. Nothing like the girl he'd known 9 years ago, exhausted and overwhelmed, working double shifts to pay for nursing school while growing his baby inside her. I closed the laptop with more force than necessary. The screen went dark, leaving me alone with my reflection in the black surface. 32 years old, tired, wearing yesterday's mascara and tomorrow's worries. When had I become this person? When had I stopped seeing possibilities and started seeing only problems? The medical bracelet caught the light as I moved my wrist. For the lives we saved together. We'd saved exactly 0 lives together. He disappeared before we could save anything, including ourselves. But the bracelet meant something. Marcus didn't do anything without a reason. That much hadn't changed. If he'd included it with the invitation, if he'd somehow found out where I worked after all these years of silence, then there was more to this story. I just wasn't sure I was brave enough to find out what. I called in sick the next day. The first time in 3 years I'd used a sick day for anything other than Lily's actual illness. The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't face Amanda's concerned looks or the way my hands might shake during morning rounds. Instead, I drove Lily to school and then found myself sitting in my car in the parking lot long after the last parent had hurried away to their real lives. The invitation was in my purse, and I kept reaching for it like a scab I couldn't stop picking. Other parents had real problems. Parent-teacher conferences about reading levels and playground disputes. I had a ghost from my past inviting me to watch him marry someone else. You're being dramatic, I told my reflection in the rearview mirror, but my hands were still shaking. I drove to the grocery store, thinking routine might help. Normal tasks, normal life. But even there, surrounded by families doing their weekly shopping, I felt like an outsider looking in. A woman in the cereal aisle was video calling her husband about dinner plans, and I found myself wondering what that felt like. Having someone to call, someone who cared about your small daily decisions. Lily and I had been a team for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to want more. My phone buzzed. Amanda, everything okay? Called in sick but saw you driving past the hospital. Coffee later? I stared at the text for a full minute before typing back, just tired. Rain check? The thing about building walls is that they keep everyone out, even the people you want to let in. I'd gotten good at walls over the years. Professional, competent, friendly, but not too close. It was safer that way. That afternoon, while Lily was at art class, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out the box from the back of my bedroom closet, the one I'd shoved there after Lily was born, and tried to forget about. Inside were remnants of a different life. Photos of Marcus and me during our residency days, him in surgical scrubs, looking exhausted but happy, me in my nursing uniform with my arm around his waist. We looked so young, so certain that love was enough to overcome anything. There were other things too. Concert tickets from a show we'd gone to, a hospital badge from his first day as a resident, letters he'd written during the brief period when he'd had to travel for a conference. His handwriting, messy and urgent, telling me he missed me, couldn't wait to come home to me. At the bottom of the box was the pregnancy test. Positive, clear as day, the one I'd planned to show him the night he disappeared. I'd practiced how I'd tell him, imagined his face lighting up, planned how we'd figure out childcare and schedules and all the logistics of building a life together. Instead, I'd come home to find his apartment empty, except for a note on the kitchen counter. I'm sorry. It's not safe for you to be with me. Don't try to find me. No explanation. No forwarding address. Just gone. Like he'd never existed at all. I tried to find him, of course. Called the hospital, contacted his friends, even drove to his mother's house in Connecticut. But it was like he'd vanished completely, erased himself from every place we'd shared. Now he was getting married, and somehow he wanted me there to witness it. I put everything back in the box except one photo. The two of us on his birthday, laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. We looked happy. We looked like we belonged together. Maybe that's what he wanted me to see, what we'd lost, what he'd thrown away. The decision came at 2 a.m., the way important decisions often do, quietly in the dark when your defenses are down and the truth can finally surface. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling when I heard Lily get up for her middle-of-the-night water ritual. She padded to the kitchen in her sock feet, and I could hear her opening the refrigerator, the soft clink of the water pitcher against the glass. "Mom?" Her voice was small in the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yeah, baby. Come here." She climbed into my bed, still clutching her water glass, and settled against my shoulder. She smelled like lavender shampoo and childhood, that particular scent of innocence that makes your heart ache. "I had a dream about my dad," she said matter-of-factly, the way she might mention dreaming about dinosaurs or flying. My chest tightened. We'd had this conversation before, but never at 2 a.m., never when I was already raw and exposed. "What kind of dream?" "He was a doctor, like you always said." But he looked sad, like he was looking for something he lost. She took a sip of water, considering. "Do you think he thinks about me sometimes?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I'd spent 8 years trying to protect her from the truth, that her father had chosen to disappear rather than be part of our lives. But lying to her now felt impossible. "I think he might," I whispered, and realized it was the first honest thing I'd said about Marcus in years. She was quiet for a moment, then, "Would you be scared to see him again?" Out of the mouths of babes. "Yeah, baby, I would be scared." "But you're brave," she said, with 8-year-old certainty. "You're the bravest person I know." After she fell asleep beside me, I lay awake thinking about bravery, about the difference between being brave and being afraid but doing something anyway. I'd spent 9 years being afraid of getting hurt again, afraid of disrupting the life we'd built, afraid of wanting things I couldn't have, but maybe it was time to be afraid and do it anyway. The next morning, I called in another sick day and drove to Boston. 3 hours in the car gave me plenty of time to second-guess myself, but I kept driving. The invitation was on the passenger seat, along with a hastily packed overnight bag and a story for Lily about visiting an old friend. Boston looked different than I remembered. Bigger, shinier, more confident. The kind of city that belonged to people like Marcus and Victoria. People who went to charity galas and had their photos in magazines. I found his address through the medical directory. Dr. Marcus Sullivan, affiliated with Boston General Hospital. His apartment building was in Back Bay, all brick and brass and old money respectability. The kind of place I'd never have been able to afford, even with my ICU salary. I sat in my car across the street for an hour, watching the entrance like a private investigator. People came and went, professionals in expensive coats, women with designer handbags, men who looked like they owned corner offices. Finally, at 3:47 p.m., I saw him. 9 years had changed him more than the photos suggested. He was thinner, his face more angular, wearing a long black coat that made him look like a stranger. But his walk was the same. Quick, purposeful, like he was always rushing towards something important. He disappeared into the building before I could decide what to do next. But seeing him, even from a distance, broke something open inside me that I'd kept carefully sealed. The boy I'd loved was gone. This was a man I didn't know, and I had no idea what I was going to say to him. I spent the night in a Holiday Inn near the hospital, lying awake in sheets that smelled like industrial detergent and other people's lives. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus walking into that building, older, different, carrying himself like someone who'd learned to be careful. In the morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I went to Boston General Hospital. The ICU there was twice the size of ours in Seattle, all gleaming equipment and hushed efficiency. I told the charge nurse I was visiting from Seattle General, comparing protocols for a research project. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was researching something. Dr. Sullivan? The nurse, a woman about my age with kind eyes, looked puzzled. He doesn't work here anymore, hasn't for about 4 years now. My carefully constructed story crumbled. Oh, I must have outdated information. Do you know where he went? She lowered her voice, glancing around the unit. He left neurosurgery altogether. There was some kind of incident, a patient death, legal issues. It was all very hush-hush, but he just stopped operating. Last I heard, he was working at a clinic in Dorchester. Dorchester. Not exactly the prestigious career path I'd imagined for the ambitious resident I'd known. The clinic was 40 minutes away, in a neighborhood that reminded me more of home than the polished streets of Back Bay. Community health center, sliding scale fees, the kind of place that served people who couldn't afford the gleaming hospitals downtown. I parked across the street and waited. Again. Marcus emerged at lunchtime, but this version of him was different from the man in the expensive coat. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, no white coat, no aura of surgical authority. He looked normal, tired, but normal. He walked to a small diner on the corner, and after 5 minutes of internal debate, I followed him. The diner was the kind of place that served coffee in heavy white mugs and knew everyone's order. Marcus sat at a corner booth, reading what looked like medical journals while eating a grilled cheese sandwich. Such an ordinary scene, so far from the life I'd imagined for him. I ordered coffee and sat 3 booths away, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid being seen. He looked up occasionally, nodding to other customers who obviously knew him. The waitress called him Doc and asked about his mother's arthritis. He laughed at something she said, and the sound made my chest ache with memory. This wasn't the man who'd abandoned me. This was someone else entirely. I was so lost in observation that I almost missed her. The small woman who slid into the booth across from Marcus. She was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a face that spoke of long-held worries. "The treatment's working," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "He had a good week." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Chen. The new medication combination seems to be helping." Chen, my maiden name. My coffee mug slipped from my hands, hitting the table with a sharp crack. Both Marcus and the woman looked over, and in that moment, I saw her clearly for the first time. She was my father's sister, my Aunt Helen, who I hadn't seen since my father's breakdown 5 years ago when we'd lost touch with most of his family. Marcus was having lunch with my aunt, asking about someone's treatment. Calling her Mrs. Chen like he knew her well, the pieces started falling into place, creating a picture I wasn't prepared to see. My father's mysterious improvement in the private facility I could never afford. The bills that somehow always got paid. The quality care that had seemed too good to be true. Marcus saw me before I could leave. Our eyes met across the diner, and his face went completely white. 9 years collapsed into nothing, and we were just 2 people staring at each other across the rubble of everything we'd lost. He stood up so quickly, he knocked over his water glass. The sound of it hitting the floor seemed to echo through the small diner, drawing stares from other customers. But Marcus didn't notice. He was walking toward me with the same determined stride I remembered, the one that used to make my heart race during those late-night hospital encounters. Sophia. My name sounded different in his voice, rougher, like he hadn't said it in years. "What are you doing here?" The reasonable answer, that I'd gotten his wedding invitation, that I'd driven 3 hours to, what, spy on him? Disrupt his new life? Suddenly seemed ridiculous. I stood up, my legs unsteady. "I could ask you the same thing. I gestured toward my Aunt Helen, who was watching us with the sharp intelligence that ran in my family. About her, about my father. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not surprise, but resignation, like he'd been waiting for this moment for 9 years. We should talk. He looked around the diner, at the faces turned our way with small-town curiosity. Not here. My Aunt Helen appeared beside us, moving with the quiet authority of someone used to handling difficult situations. Marcus, dear, perhaps you should introduce me properly to your friend. Aunt Helen, I said before Marcus could speak. It's me, Sophia, James Chen's daughter. Her face changed completely, cycling through recognition, shock, and something that looked almost like relief. Sophia, oh my dear girl. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender and old photographs. He talks about you constantly. Your father. He's so proud of you, of what you've accomplished. My father, who I'd barely spoken to in 2 years because seeing him in that facility broke my heart every time. How do you know Marcus? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. He's been taking care of your father for 5 years now, she said simply. Ever since the breakdown, the facility, the treatments, everything. We tried to reach you, but I'd been too proud, too hurt, too wrapped up in my own pain to return calls from people who wanted to talk about my father's condition. Marcus was watching this exchange with careful eyes. Helen, maybe I should talk to Sophia alone. She nodded, patting my arm. Your father would love to see you, dear. He's doing so much better now. After she left, Marcus and I walked to a small park across the street. It was one of those crisp October days when the air felt like possibility, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew was crumbling around me. Why? I asked when we finally sat on a bench overlooking a pond where ducks paddled in lazy circles. Why did you leave, and why are you taking care of my father? Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at the water. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There was a patient, Robert Ashworth, Victoria's father. He glanced at me. I suppose you looked her up? I may have Googled. He died during a routine procedure. Brain surgery, something I'd done 100 times before, but this time, he ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. There were complications. The family sued, but it wasn't just malpractice, Sophia. There were death threats. People connected to pharmaceutical companies he'd been investigating. People who thought I knew more than I did. And my father? Was the consulting psychiatrist on the case. He'd discovered irregularities in drug trials, patients being used as test subjects without consent. When he tried to report it, Marcus looked at me directly for the first time. They destroyed him, Sophia, systematically dismantled his career, his reputation, his mental health. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so much darker than I'd imagined. The night you were going to tell me about the baby, Marcus continued, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. I got a call. Photos of you leaving the hospital, going to your car, shopping at the grocery store. They knew your schedule, Sophia. They knew everything about you. The bench suddenly felt cold beneath me. What kind of photos? The kind that come with instructions. Stay quiet about the Ashworth case, marry into the family to ensure silence, or watch everyone you care about disappear the same way they'd made your father disappear. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. So, you just left? I thought I was protecting you. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I thought if I vanished completely, if they believed I'd abandoned everything that mattered to me, they'd leave you alone. And my father? I couldn't save his career, but I could save his life. The facility, the treatment, it was the least I could do. Marcus turned to face me fully. I've been paying for his care ever since. Your Aunt Helen has been my contact, updating me on his progress. The anger I'd carried for 9 years was transforming into something else, not forgiveness, but understanding. You could have told me. And put you in danger? Put our baby in danger? He shook his head. I was 26 years old, Sophia. I was terrified and stupid, and I thought I was being noble. Noble. The word tasted bitter. Do you know what the last 9 years have been like? Raising Lily alone, explaining to her why her father didn't want to be part of her life? Lily. He said her name like it was something precious. Is she She's perfect. She's brilliant and stubborn, and she has your eyes and your terrible habit of reading medical journals for fun. Tears were running down my face now, hot and angry and relieved all at once. She wants to be a doctor, like her mom and her mystery father. Marcus was crying too, silently, the way men do when they're trying to hold themselves together. I've missed everything. You chose to miss everything. I chose to keep you alive. We sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks and the families walking by with their ordinary problems. A little girl was feeding bread to the ducks while her parents watched, and I found myself thinking about all the moments Marcus had missed. Lily's first steps, her first words, first day of school, every birthday, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. The wedding invitation, I said finally. Why now? Marcus pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Because Victoria found out about the threats. She's been investigating her father's death, her family's connections to the pharmaceutical company. She wants to expose everything, but she needed evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that comes from people who were there? Your father, when he's having good days, remembers things. Important things. Names, dates, conversations. He handed me the paper. Victoria's not just my fiancée, Sophia. She's an investigative journalist. The wedding is cover for the largest medical fraud investigation in Massachusetts history. I unfolded the paper. FBI letterhead, official seals, a summary of charges being prepared against Ashworth Pharmaceuticals and associated parties. This is really happening? The wedding is tomorrow. Half the people on the guest list are either targets or witnesses. The FBI will be there recording everything. Marcus looked at me with something that might have been hope. Victoria specifically asked me to invite you. She thinks your testimony, combined with your father's records, could be the final piece they need. And after? When it's all over? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I've spent 9 years learning to live without the things I wanted most. I'm not sure I remember how to want them anymore. But the way he looked at me suggested maybe he was beginning to remember. The wedding was beautiful in a surreal, almost theatrical way. The Four Seasons ballroom glittered with enough flowers and fairy lights to stock a small country, and guests moved through the reception like actors who knew they were being watched, which, as it turned out, they were. Victoria looked stunning in ivory silk, but when she approached me during cocktail hour, her first words were, "Did Marcus tell you about the microphones in my bouquet?" She was nothing like I'd expected. Sharp, funny, and possessed of the kind of fearless curiosity that probably made her an excellent journalist. She also clearly adored Marcus, but not in the way I'd feared. "He's been in love with you for 9 years, she told me matter-of-factly, adjusting something small and electronic hidden among the white roses. It's been absolutely exhausting listening to him pretend otherwise. He's marrying you." "Oh, honey, no." She laughed, a bright sound that carried across the elegant chaos around us. "This is the most expensive sting operation in FBI history. Marcus and I are about as romantically involved as two people can possibly not be." The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Toasts that were actually confessions, wedding guests who were actually suspects, and somewhere in the middle of it all, my father appeared. He looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but his eyes were clear and focused. When he saw me, he smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. "Sophia, my brilliant daughter." He took my hands in his. "Marcus told me you might be here. I have so much to tell you." And he did. Over the course of the evening, in quiet moments between the official festivities, my father told me about pharmaceutical trials conducted on psychiatric patients without consent, about doctors threatened into silence, about a cover-up that had destroyed careers and lives. But he also told me about Marcus, about the young man who'd visited him every week for 5 years, who'd advocated for better treatments, who'd never stopped asking about his daughter and granddaughter. "He loves you," my father said simply. "He always has. Everything he did to protect you." By the time the FBI agents began making arrests, quietly, efficiently, with minimum disruption to the elegant proceedings, I understood that some stories don't have villains and heroes. They have people making impossible choices with incomplete information, trying to protect what matters most. Marcus found me on the hotel balcony afterward, still wearing his tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone and his hair messed up from the long night. "It's over," he said simply. "Is it?" "The investigation, the threats, all of it. The pharmaceutical executives are in custody. The cover-up is exposed." He moved closer, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "I'm free, Sophia. For the first time in 9 years, I'm free to choose what I want." "And what do you want?" "I want to meet my daughter. I want to learn how to be her father, if she'll let me. I want to make amends for 9 years of absence." He paused, looking out at the Boston skyline. "And I want to find out if the woman I never stopped loving might be willing to give us another chance." I thought about Lily at home with the babysitter, probably reading medical journals under her covers with a flashlight. I thought about the life we'd built, the walls I'd constructed, the fear that had guided too many decisions. "It won't be easy," I said. "I know. She'll have questions, lots of them. I'll have answers. And I don't forgive easily." Marcus smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since that day in the diner. Lucky for me, I'm a very patient man. The future stretched ahead of us, uncertain but full of possibility. For the first time in 9 years, I wasn't afraid to want things I couldn't control. I was ready to be brave.